Hey everyone, James Azar here with CyberHub Engage, still in our secret layer at RSA with our friends at Synopsys. Tim, this time we're face to face, man. We're face to face. We're not over interweb lines and wires and video.
Different parts of the world.
Different parts. No, we've come together. We've merged into one with a beautiful view.
This is an awesome view.
It is a great view. And I don't know if people can see the elevators going up and down, but I hope that during our conversations they'll match the ups and downs, simultaneously all go up, simultaneously all go down. Stayed at that hotel 2 years ago. It was a really fun elevator ride. If you're afraid of heights, not for you, because that's the only way to get up to your room. Those are the only elevators.
Okay, so I got to remember, girlfriend never goes there.
Yes, girlfriend never goes there. Yeah. So, Tim, we're talking about the friction of AppSec and DevOps and how organizations can achieve DevSecOps. So, DevSecOps, a ultimate goal. Mm-hmm. And before you came out, I was talking to Patrick, and we were talking about CodeSite and a lot of what it does and how it brings it all together. But really, let's talk about that friction between AppSec and DevOps first.
So, anyone who's ever been on the receiving end of one of these DAS security reports from AppScan or audits of code or anything where there's a third party who's decided, hey, we need to look at your code, they're faced with a doc that's about that thick, and somewhere in there there's actually something useful. But they have to sift through a couple hundred issues that are false positives. That's a whole lot of pushback to a development team. That's a whole lot of extra time burnt for uncertain results. If you want to have security adopted within the process, you got to reduce the friction. You got to make it something that is at the point of context, at the point of decision, at the point of implementation, or at the point of activity. So that context is the key.
So you talk about context matters, but what do you really mean by context is key?
So if I'm tasked with creating a particular feature, I'm working in this little section of code in this file and that little section of code in this other file, and I'm in the moment of figuring out exactly what I'm going to do. If I go and commit that code and it goes through some testing and say 2-3 days later, a week later, suddenly there's now a new ticket that says, oops, gee whiz, but you screwed up and this thing doesn't work, I'm now out of that zone. The documentation around code isn't what it should be, never will be.
Right.
And the moment that you increase the time differential between creation and testing, you're losing. So if I can give you that context right now that this is something that will not meet policy, while I'm writing it, I can go and bring out Sketchpad and solve the problem. Because I'm thinking about that problem right now. I'm not thinking about the problem from last week.
So a lot of times when you talk about DevOps, they're constantly challenged with, because they're a business unit. Mm-hmm. And security a lot of times is that hindrance. It's slowing down the process. So how do you achieve that synergy? I'm going to get right into it. We're not even going to just role play or anything. Yeah. We're just going to go right into it. How do you get to that synergy between the two?
So the key element is recognizing who actually is going to feel the pain. So if I've deployed something and it's now out in production, the people feeling the pain, that's the ops guys. They're the ones who are going to have to take that pager and figure out what the hell is going on at 3:30 in the morning when something happens to go wrong. The developers, well, they've got the luxury of waiting until tomorrow or the next day or whatever. They don't feel the pain. So that disconnect is something that the SEC team can solve by looking at it through the lens of friction. So if I can bring everything as close to the decision point and have as small a context around it, then I can fix the problems before they become 3 a.m. pager issues, more often than not. So as an example, why not embed the actual testing as part of, or the security review as part of the existing testing paradigm? Why force them to do an extra step? That's where a tool like an interactive AppSec tool becomes very powerful.
But a lot of times, security is an afterthought simply because either the talent isn't there, the technology doesn't exist, right? Or the business goals, or you've got a bad CISO. And let's be honest, right? Sometimes you've got a bad CISO.
This is true.
Who just isn't able to communicate the necessity of having security implemented within DevOps so that you don't have to go back and fix something, but rather you're addressing it as the development stage goes on. So let's look at those CISOs that are having that challenge. What advice would you give them? Give them some wisdom, Tim.
So the key thing that I would look at is they need to put themselves in the shoes of the people who are actually going to have to deal with the pain. Because I can come up with any number of software security initiatives that are going to come down upon high and say that you need to do X, Y, and Z. But ultimately, those things don't get implemented if they're too painful. If I'm creating additional work for the dev team, or I'm forcing my ops teams to jump through hoops, they're going to find workarounds that are going to be good enough to get things done and just deal with it. And the greater the connection or the disconnect between get it done and what the CISO wants, the greater the potential for some audit-related issue or compliance-related issue to really destabilize the organization. So it's in the CISO's best interest to make certain that they're actually creating a least friction environment to adopt the policies that they want to put in place, as opposed to thou shalt do.
So I got to tell you, in my time doing this podcast, I've probably spoken to over 60, 70 CISOs. And they come from all different walks and places in life. Some have a decorated military background, went into the security role, excelled. Some come from software development, and what you say now, they completely understand. They're able to go into the dev team. They're able to communicate that message. And others are what I like to call the policy CISOs. Mm-hmm. They're great at governance. They're great at documentation. Mm-hmm. They're great at compliance. But everything else is almost, in hindsight, an extreme challenge for them. Mm-hmm. So when you take a look, you started earlier, you were talking about documentation. Mm-hmm. And the process of documenting development today is
largely non-existent.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't going to say it, you said it. Right?
Like, I've got a Swagger doc. Okay, cool.
Right. And so how do you start addressing that documentation piece? And then how do you integrate both of those together?
So I would say that that's going to start from whoever the feature leads, app leads, architects are working their way up to that CISO who's more policy and procedure centric. One of the things that I actually like to talk about when I'm delivering more of a broader DevOps kind of talk is that engineers are reluctant to actually engage with whoever their governance teams are. I've said many times from stage, find who your lawyers are, make friends with them, take them to lunch, get them a drink. They're there to protect you, but they don't know what they're protecting from. And so remove the academic nature of what their governance is and put it in concrete terms such that they can understand why you're doing what you're doing, what the concessions to time of delivery that you're making are, what the concessions that you're making in terms of functionality and the competitive landscape. Because you're making all these point-in-time decisions that are going to ultimately impact governance at some level. And if you just have this arbitrary, well, I'm going to follow this template, you've lost out what the app is all about.
So when you talk about transparency, right, we always talk about the transparency in testing. Mm-hmm. A lot of times testing an app or testing something for security is almost arbitrary, meaning we're going to test just the very, very basics and stop because we don't want to go too deep into it because that's going to push out deployment, it's going to push out execution, and so much further. So how important is transparency in testing?
It's huge. And it's huge because the end result is going to be something that you actually have to be able to measure, because you're not going to test today and then forget about it. You're going to continually test. And the greater the level of transparency that you have, the better you can actually start to manage towards targets. So, for example, if you have that proverbial external scan comes in, reviews yield 100 issues, what you do next is really important. You can either decide that you're going to address some of those issues, maybe the critical high severity vulnerabilities, keep the rest of them in place, and then adopt we're going to have no new issues policy, and we'll just let the rest of them be sleeping dogs, and as we evolve the application, we'll improve upon the situation. but making that entire decision process around it transparent such that the entire engineering org and the entire service delivery org understands why that's happening helps alleviate some of the, but you didn't fix this thing that I believe is like super critical. You didn't solve this. And then you can start to have those discussions and actually have everyone have a seat at the table around what we're going to do to improve the security of what's being delivered.
When we talk about delivery and you talk about the security of different products, oftentimes one of the challenges that exists there is the actual monitoring and the continuous monitoring of security. Mm-hmm. So we all know SOCs, we all know incidents, we all know false positives, but let's talk a little bit about continuous monitorings and the changing in security risks, especially during the deployment phase.
So from my perspective, up until the point that you deploy something, how well you've designed, developed, secured that application is largely an academic exercise. Stuff doesn't get real until you have your first customer, until you've shipped your first product. And then stuff gets real very, very, very quickly. And so being able to have an understanding as to what the potential threats that your application is going to receive once it's in the wild is critical. Now, NIST says, hey, we should all be doing continuous monitoring, but they don't actually say what that means.
Well, and that's a very, very big term, continuous monitoring. And for me, it sounds really expensive.
So some of it can be really straightforward. So, for example, if I know that I'm using a whole ton of open source componentry to accelerate my time to market, I also know that those open source components and any third-party libraries that might be part of my compiler and my compiler itself, those are external things. So they're going to rev independently of whatever my release cycle is or whatever my sprints are. And as a result, they're going to have the potential for security issues, new vulnerabilities, and so forth being patched externally to my delivery cycle. As a result, I need to make certain that I'm ahead of the game, that I know exactly what the composition of stuff that I have is, because if I suddenly have a new vulnerability disclosure in something that's kind of peripheral to the core functionality of what I have, but allows an attacker to get into a post-ship serious bug, well, now I've actually exposed a weakness that wasn't otherwise apparent. And that's part of the continuous monitoring, being able to understand what the impact to the application is, not just, oh, well, I suddenly have a bunch of random socket connects that are trying to get in through my interactive logins from Brazil or from Russia or the Ukraine or wherever. It's like, yeah, you've got the network monitoring piece, but what does it actually mean to own that application, and what does it mean to monitor for that application?
All I hear from what you're saying is more dashboards.
Nobody wants another dashboard. Not a single person wants another dashboard.
I was walking the RSA floor a little earlier. I don't know if you were here. I was telling the guys, I was like, everywhere I looked, there was another dashboard. Another innovative dashboard to tell you more data that you already know or seem to want to know. Because this piece of data is so important.
And you walk into a NOC and you see like 700 TVs and you got the giant 85-inch one in the middle and there's a couple that are flashing red everywhere. And nobody wants another console, because they don't know what the data is, which gets back to context. If I'm a developer, I live in my IDE. I live in my defect management system, say Jira. That's how I manage my time. That's how I manage my work. Give me the information that I need in order to be successful in those tools. Don't force me to go down this, well, I'm going to spend 5 days with a hands-on training class to learn this new dashboard and this new methodology. No, tell me, if you do ABC, things go boom. Give me that ticket. Let me go and actually fix ABC goes boom, and then have the software actually go and verify that the fix actually solved the problem. Don't force the developers to end up in unnatural positions.
So I agree with you on the aspect of, I don't want any more dashboards. And I don't want developers leaving their natural environment. I feel even, you were talking about a NOC. I've been to a bunch of NOC and SOCs, and actually the most effective ones I've seen have been the ones with the least amount of screens. Mm-hmm. Because they don't have 700 data points. They've got what really matters, and all the rest is just junk.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's all about being able to have that locality of reference that says, I'm going to solve this one problem right now. yes, there could be 1,000 other problems, but this is the one that I'm solving right now. And from a development cycle, whoever the feature owner is going to say, Tim, you need to work on this now.
So,
and the rest of it, just arbitrarily saying, oh, this proverbial developer is going to fix everything. Well, no, that context is the key.
So I wanna role play with you for a second.
Okay.
You're a CISO. It's great to talk about this, everything you just said. How would you implement this in your business? What would be the steps that you would take to really bring the two together and create this successful integration of DevOps and AppSec to create a DevSecOps environment?
So the first thing that I would look at is who is actually creating the code and how they're making their decisions. Bring that data into their world. Bring every single piece of tooling and then give them the seat at the table and say, now how do we actually improve the security of what you're delivering without forcing you into this outside weird world of threats that you don't necessarily know? Java developers don't know how to harden operating systems, nor should they be expected to. That's another seat at the table. What are we actually going to do to improve on this? And keep things as compartmentalized as possible such that you don't end up with the $1 million spend on yet another AppSec tool that's
right.
not going to be productive. By focusing the attention on what is the priority and what can we do to smooth delivery without going and arbitrarily increasing delivery cycles, that's key.
So that's one of the beautiful things that you just talked about, which is save time, save money, be able to execute really effectively by just building that relationship.
Yeah, DevOps is all about the people process. Bring the people to the table. Ostensibly, you hired smart people. They have opinions that are important. Let them recognize that this is something that they're going to accept into their process.
Looking and kind of going forward, how do you see DevSecOps developing over the course of this calendar year? And what do you think are going to be major milestones that maybe the industry can accomplish over the course of this year?
So I think the biggest thing from an industry perspective is recognizing that it's Dev, Sec, and Ops. It's not Sec, Dev, Ops. It's not DevOps, Sec, that we actually have the glue between the communication cycle.
The development, the security.
Well, no, it's if you look at the proverbial Mobius, that feedback mechanism is a feed forward as to feature functions and what you need to do to operate this, and a feedback based on what we've learned in operating it. That security piece needs to be in the middle to say, well, we've responded to an external governance change, CCPA, for example. That's required us to think about things differently. Feed that back into the developer's world, because now they're in a position to start making intelligent decisions around how should we manage data as a result of this new security change or this new security landscape. And similarly, having the feed forward, that connective tissue in the middle, that's Sec. We need to make certain that it's not impeding the information flow, and that's the big thing that I would say for this year.
That's excellent. Tim, I can talk to you for more and more time. I know on our last daily cyber briefing, we couldn't quite hang up the line.
This is true.
But we are limited because we are in the secret Synopsys layer, which is on a it's in a very high floor of a very nice hotel that starts with an M. There's plenty of those around.
Plenty of those around.
And so, thank you so much for coming on.
You're welcome.
I really
Anytime.
appreciate it. We'll be back with more from our friends at Synopsys after this little message here. Make sure you come by and say hello to our friends at Synopsys at their booth in the South Hall. Can't miss it. Rotating Synopsys sign.
Giant purple rotating sign. Cannot miss it.
Yes. We'll be back with more after this.